Good evening. This is Will Whitaker reporting with Colin Donnelly. This evening we'll be discussing the independence movement in Kenya. Now on to Colin.
Britain increased control over Kenya in the nationalist movement such as the Mau Mau Revolution. Kenya was angry as a result of Britain controlling once privately owned land and allowing mass immigration to Kenya. The Mau Mau resented European monopolization for their lands and power. They were also angered by attempts to change their culture. Britain increased control over Kenya led to an outrage among the Kenyans. Since the beginning, the Kenyans resisted British influence, but things escalated in the 1920s when Britain took control of much of the locally owned land to grow cash crops. This led to a famine throughout the country. Tensions reached an all-time height in 1952 when the Kenyans revolted against the British in the Mau Mau Revolution. The British ruled and treated the Kenyan people brutally. It is said that in Nairobi, Kenya, British officers ordered Kenyans off crowded buses for insurgents who had challenged the empire's rule. An example is Midabuki Kimweli, who was treated brutally by the British. It was just before Christmas in 1957 when he was traveling with his wife Naomi along with 3 of their children when British officers demanded to know involvement when the Mau Mau anti-colonial movement. Naomi was separated from her children, blindfolded, beaten, and then raped with a glass bottle. Nearby, her husband was castrated with a pair of pliers by the British officers, demonstrating their cruel and unjust reign. These abuses were part of a systematic campaign of torture illustrated by the British to suppress the Mau Mau uprising in the 1950s. Now on to Will.
The quest for independence in Kenya started with the Young Kikuyu Association, also known as the YKA, which was Kenya's first all-African political organization. Founded in June 1921, the Young Kikuyu Association was founded to express the Kikuyu people's issues with the British power. The founding of the YKA was one of the first steps toward independence in Kenya. In 1953, the Mau Mau Revolution, one of the deadliest independence movements in Africa in the 20th century, took place, killing hundreds of thousands of people as it raged through Kenya. The Mau Mau were fed up with British control over Kenya and sought to remove all the white people out of their country. While the British defeated them, it did make the British change the way in which they managed Kenya, and eventually led to Kenya's independence in 1963. All right, cut.
Thanks, Will. During the war, 10,500 Mau Maus were killed. The British killed 1,800 African and 58 European and Indian civilians. The British Army lost 63 British and 534 African soldiers. The result of the Mau Mau revolt, or decolonization, forced the British to grant more political power to the Kenyans. They released Kenyatta from prison in 1961, and he became Kenya's first prime minister. When Kenya gained its independence in 1963, Jomo Kenyatta became president of Kenya until his death in 1978. However, when his successor Daniel Arap Moi came into power, he firmly established one-party system and was ruthless in putting down his opposition or enemies. Although Kenya had gained its freedom, they still struggled for political equality within itself, and it wasn't until 2002 that an opposition party took rule in Kenya. When Kenyatta became president, Vice President Odinga created a separate party to support the poor people.
The garden party at Government House was an informal farewell to British rule in Kenya. Jomo Kenyatta presented some of the guests to the Duke and Mr. Sands. An epoch of 68 years was closing, years in which a wilderness became a thriving country. At Nairobi, the Duke of Edinburgh and Mr. Kenyatta received the freedom of the city. At the Uhuru Stadium, the Articles of Independence were handed by the Duke to the country's Prime Minister. At midnight, the Union Jack was lowered for the last time, and Kenya ceased to be a colony and became independent. culture remains in the Commonwealth. It was estimated that 250,000 people witnessed the moving ceremony. Then it was as though someone had said, "Let joy be unconfined." Uninhibited tribal dancing took over. No one can say that Africans make the mistake of taking their pleasure sadly. Good luck to Kenya in her new role as an independent nation.